Welcome to the Asking Why podcast. I'm your host, Clint Davis. I'm a marriage and family therapist and licensed professional counselor trained in trauma and addiction. The Asking Why podcast is for anyone on a journey of healing and restoration. If you are searching for answers to life's questions and want to learn more about root causes from a psychological and theological mix, this show is for you. In this podcast, myself and a co-host from Clint Davis Counseling and Integrative Wellness will interview guests on a wide range of topics in order to get down to the heart of the problems facing our world and understand why things happen and how to change the world and ourselves for the better. Want to learn more tips and tricks to living a healthy lifestyle? Visit us at Clint Davis Counseling and Integrative Wellness on Facebook and Instagram. If you want to meet our staff or book a speaker, go to clintdaviscounseling.com. Thanks for listening and be sure to subscribe today. All right, episode 26 of the Asking Why podcast. We have Chantal Small. I said I'm going to butcher that because my sister's name is Chantal, so I keep wanting to say the wrong thing. But we're glad to have you here. You work at it used to be Crisis Pregnancy Center. Now it's Care Pregnancy Center. Yes. Mm-hmm. So the goal of this podcast today, for those listening, we're going to talk about kind of the pro-life movement. Talk a little bit about pro-life versus pro-choice. What the Care Pregnancy Center offers and what it does, and maybe some myths and some misconceptions about pro-life and what that is, because it's a really hot topic in our culture, and I think a lot of people have misconceptions and misunderstandings. They have their own stances on things based on politics and based on church and based on information, and so I just thought it'd be good to kind of talk about that and talk about what you do, but also how can we all get plugged in if it's something that we're passionate about on either side, and how can we make the world better in that way and give people more resources? So tell us kind of who you are and what you do. And
yeah, well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Chantal Small. So I'm actually a New Yorker, born and raised, lived around a couple different places. My husband and I met at Bible college. We came to the South almost 11 years ago. Got 2 kids, nice. Almost an 11-year-old girl, and then my son just turned 8.
Okay.
We are passionate about just people in general, just loving people, and authenticity is kind of our heartbeat.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to the CPC, the Pregnancy Center, the Lord honestly led me there almost 5 years ago. It was like one of those spur of the moment things. I just had this weird feeling I need to go apply, and I did. But I've been pro-life, and my journey has kind of evolved as far as my views goes. My convictions are much stronger now, so I'm just a huge advocate for people, vulnerable people, both babies and women.
Nice. So tell us a little bit about what the Care Pregnancy Center is.
So we are a faith-based pro-life ministry. We started 28 years ago, actually on a kitchen table. 28 years ago, Hope Medical Group for Women, the abortion clinic, existed. There was a lady whose sister went and had an abortion. She felt at a loss. And so the sister decided she was going to start something to offer women not just hope, but also options information.
Right.
So we have a clinic. We are a licensed clinic. We've got a team of nurses. We've got a medical director. He's been an OBGYN for almost 50 years, wow. Actually. We also have a parenting resource center. So we believe in coming alongside the woman way after she's had her baby, till at the very least our resources are available till she's 3. But the mentorship part of the program can be for years after that.
Okay. Until the baby's 3? Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm. Till baby's 3, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So what other resources do you offer?
So in the clinic itself, we've got options counseling, free pregnancy testing. The lady has the opportunity to sit confidentially with one of our trained, we call them client advocates, more like a peer counselor. Mm-hmm. They know from our paperwork they have to sign that we're confidential, that we don't perform abortions, and that we're just peer counselors. They are kind of aware of all that. From there, if her test is positive, she has the opportunity to have a free ultrasound. Offhand, an ultrasound can cost anywhere between $400 to $500, so we offer those for free. Mm-hmm. They're limited, so we only look for heartbeat, gestational age, and to see if baby's in the uterus.
Gotcha.
We also encourage fatherhood, the Fatherhood Initiative. We believe in empowering the man to be a leader, and especially that fatherhood begins in the womb, so we invite him to be a part of our program. From there, if she has, or if they have that need for not just monetary items like strollers, pack and plays, Pampers and things like that, but if she wants the emotional support and the educational support, we've got parenting classes galore that you can think of. They're updated continually. Co-parenting classes, they go all the way from pregnancy through the toddler years. And we also have healthy relationship classes. Our vision statement is to create a culture where abortion is unthinkable. So to us, it's not just about making abortion illegal. It's not about even just minimizing the numbers of abortions. It's about changing the mindset of why it's needed, in hopes that people won't think that it is anymore.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we do is sexual risk avoidance education. So helping them to understand, the STD education, that's part of it, but also healthy relationships and boundaries, being selective with your partners. So our curriculum goes from faith-based all the way to, if the girl or the lady is non-faith-based, it's basically, she's welcome to come as well.
Yeah. So you're giving them education, not just like, here's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, but here's your choices, letting them make the best choice with informed information.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. So how did you kind of come about being passionate about this and getting involved in kind of the pro-life movement? Or
So I didn't grow up in church. I think that's important to say, because I didn't have anybody telling me what to believe, whether pro-abortion or not. I gave my heart to the Lord when I was 17. I got saved from attempted suicide. From there, I had this just insane desire to read the Bible. So I religiously, forgive the words, but religiously read it every day.
Yeah, I'm going to slow you down. So, because you went over that really quickly. So when you say you got saved from an attempted suicide, do you mind kind of telling that story a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So my father was he's a little mentally ill, which, hey, this is what you do for a living.
Right, yeah.
So
we're all a little mentally ill.
Yeah, all of us. Yeah, dysfunction. So we grew up in a very violent home, domestic, verbal abuse. There was some sexual abuse in my past when I was a little girl. I'm the oldest of 4, and my mom, there was a lot of infidelity from my father's part, and that kind of spiraled her into depression, and she became an alcoholic. So I was the main, I guess you can say adult, but I was 16 at that point. I ruined my chances for art school. I had always wanted to become an art, I wanted to draw for Disney. That was my goal. But you had to have a B average in math, which I failed at. And so at that point, I just had the wrong friends, the wrong influence. But someone shared the gospel with me when I was in a freshman in high school, and it had never left me. And what she shared with me was, because I knew about God, and like I had told her, I knew God was real, but I thought he was so far and detached from humanity. But she said, you can have a relationship with God. So that never left me. So you fast forward, I'm 17, I'm sitting in my basement in New York, and I'm preparing to take a bunch of pills. I'm sitting on the floor. I had a journal. I love to journal since I was little. And so my goal was to write a goodbye letter, basically, to my family. But in the back of my mind, this thought came out to me is, why can't you reach out to God? So instead of writing my letter, I started writing to God. And I still have this journal to this day. And I just pretty much just said things like, I want so badly to be loved. I want so badly to know that there's a future for me. And it was wild, because even the little sins that I had done bothered me so much, to where I knew that I knew I needed a savior, basically. So in that moment, I didn't know how to pray, but I just said, God, I want to live for you. I don't know what that looks like. So I closed my journal, decided to go to bed. The very next morning I woke up, I felt completely different. I had this desire to live. I knew God did something. I had a youth pastor a long time ago told me that it was almost like the Holy Spirit hugged you. It's kind of how I can describe it. I kept going to school that day, and I said, God bless you to everybody. And they kept saying, I didn't sneeze. Why are you saying God bless you? Because I knew God did something.
Especially in New York.
Yeah. So that's pretty much how the journey started. Just as the Lord would have it, I just so happened to find a Bible-believing church to go to. We had attended it a couple times, but we attended several churches. And that's pretty much where I was discipled. So yeah, that's how I got saved. So in the moment of that was my second semester junior year. Seeking God's will, at that point decided I was going to be a missionary. I was going to go to a Bible college. I found a really good one. So yet still, I had never known what the topic of abortion, as far as scriptures goes, what to believe about it. And so there was a high school paper that had come out. It was written by students. A bunch of students would just write on random topics, most of it political, but I was a very shy student. I think that I was painfully shy is the words my mom would use. I think that's important to reference. Because when I saw an article written by a girl that said a woman's right to choose, immediately something just sprang up on the inside, almost like this righteous anger kind of a thing. And I wasn't angry at her, but just at this topic as I was reading it, because I remember studying Psalm 139, and I remember reading Jeremiah 1:5, and these verses didn't line up with what she was saying, and and it was the amount of encouragement that the article received that enabled me to feel the bravery to write the rebuttal. So the rebuttal article I wrote was No Right to Live, and I just basically came at the emphasis of every human being has value, and every human being should be given a chance to live, and they can make their own choice whether they want to live or not. So that's how I would say I became pro-life.
Gotcha. That's a heavy story.
It is. It's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. We were talking about you talking fast before, so you're doing good on your pace.
Thanks.
But you got through a lot of that really good.
Thanks.
Yeah. Do you use that story a lot with what you do now?
I do. It's funny. I didn't even think about that. I would say when I truly became what I call pro-abundant life, it was a few years after that. Mm-hmm. I'd say that's probably when God started to speak to me, especially theologically, what the scriptures say, and just being an advocate for the most vulnerable, of humanity. But
what were the responses to your rebuttal?
Actually, a lot of positive ones. Surprisingly, in a very liberal school in New York, I remember a teacher came behind me and patted my back. I remember I was in the nurse's office getting weighed for something, and she said, "Oh, you're Chantal Montijo. You wrote that article." I said, "Yeah, I did." So a lot of positive ones. Hindsight, I kind of wondered if maybe the girl who wrote it might have been post-abortive. Yeah. Now knowing what I know, I kind of almost feel a little bit, I don't know, compassion, I guess you can say.
Yeah, and I would say that because, if you listen to the podcast, I always like to give caveats.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this and you have had an abortion, or you're struggling with the idea of an abortion, or you're pro-life or you're pro-choice, like we're not taking a stance to shame anybody mm-hmm. or to make anybody feel less than. We're just talking about your belief on it, what you do, why mm-hmm. the Care Pregnancy Center has been so great. But if you're out there, and I would think that's probably what you're saying mm-hmm. is like the lessons you learn is that people are people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that when people are going through things and they're hurting and they're in pain, they get lost in what to mm-hmm. do. And you can take a stance and have a position, and we'll get into that as we go, and not be hateful and not be judgmental and not be critical. And I think that's one of the things y'all do really, really well.
Right, absolutely. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I know we've talked before, and so I just want people who are listening who are maybe triggered by this conversation or what they've done in their past and the shame they feel to be able to let that go, mm-hmm. and hear that you are loved and valued. And if this has happened to you or been a part of your life or been an experience you've had, this conversation is not to shame anybody or say, how dare you, or you're a bad person. Mm-hmm. But yeah, a lot of times people have those stances because of their experience, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We always say, even the girls that we see that are or that come in considering an abortion, sometimes the baby is not the problem. The baby complicates a problem that already exists most of the time.
Yeah.
And so sometimes getting to the root of what is it that you're afraid of, or what is it that's really bothering you? They see the baby and they immediately focus on that, being the evil entity, I guess you can say. But the reality of it is, it's just so much more that goes into someone who considers an abortion, and compassion needs to be had all the time.
Right.
So having said that, I would say I was pro-life. Embrace Grace is an amazing ministry. They come alongside women through the church ministry. Okay. They have this slogan. They say pro-life saves the baby, but pro-love saves them both. Mm. And so when I became pro-love was fast forward a few years later, I was pregnant with my daughter. I had...
well, that'll change your view of everything, right?
Yes, especially then, because you're emotional. Sometimes God will speak to me in dreams. I know it sounds really weird, but it doesn't happen often. But sometimes you wake up and I'm like, that was not my mind. Mm-hmm. And I had this dream. A friend of mine in real life, my good friend at the time, she had told me, hey, I talked to the doctor. He told me that my husband and I can't have children. I've got something wrong with my body. I can never have children. I said, let's just pray about that. Don't just believe that. We'll pray. God can do anything. So in my dream, she had approached me and she said, hey, Chantal, guess what? God answered my prayer. I'm pregnant. And then my loved one, I'll just say that, my loved one came to me in the dream as well. And she said, I'm pregnant too. And I looked at her and I said, but who's the father? And then I woke up. So why that was so interesting was because this loved one of mine was in a very committed, very loving relationship for at least 5 years. And it just was the most interesting thing. It was a very impactful dream. It stayed with me, but I dismissed it as being just a random, maybe I had weird pizza for dinner.
Yeah.
But a week later, that good friend of mine said to me, "Hey, Chantal, guess what? God answered our prayers. I'm pregnant." And immediately I knew this loved one is in trouble. So I made a phone call to my mom and I said, "Hey, I had this dream," and she, went to this loved one's apartment and she's just looking for evidence. She ended up going through her glove compartment and saw a certificate for an appointment for an abortion. So she approached her. Again, this is those things that hindsight, you look back and say, gosh, if we had just done things differently, if I would have known how to approach someone in that position, she would be a totally different person today. And fear took over, for my mom, fear took over for the family. And long story short, the person did abort. She didn't know who the father was. And she is the high statistic of women who suffer what they call post-abortion stress. When it comes to like the signs, how do you know if you're one who will suffer? She hit a lot of those boxes.
Can you talk through those?
Yeah, definitely. So one of them is, do you have feelings of wanting to keep the pregnancy a secret? Do you have feelings of wanting the baby? Do you have any kind of past childhood sexual abuse or recent traumatic experiences? Is anybody forcing you to an abortion or coercing you to abort? Are you having relationship problems? And there's a whole list, but those are the top ones that for sure, especially she was listed under. And so it significantly increases your risk for, all kinds of things like PTSD, suicidal thoughts and behavior, substance abuse, anxiety, depression, all kinds of things.
Right.
Yes.
So it's basically saying, for those of us like me, they're dumb. So it's saying that if it's not as clear cut as everybody has a great life, they had sex with somebody, and now they're like, oh, I just don't want this baby. Right. That's not the normal story. Is that what you would say? No, it's not the normal
story. And not everybody, and we always list it as these are possible risks. It's not a for certain that if you have these, listed that you will go through these things.
It's a more likely.
Yes, exactly. Very high increased risk.
Yeah, people ask me that all the time about sex, sex before marriage, and I'll be at a talk or in a study or whatever, and people will, want me to talk to their kid about why is it that you shouldn't have sex before marriage, and I always like to take the stance of that as like a risk assessment. I mean, I can get into it biblically, but the more partners you have, the more likely you are to, have problems later. It's not a guarantee, right? It doesn't mean everything's going to be a disaster and you can't have a good sex life or you won't get married, but you certainly increase your risk as you go.
Right, absolutely.
And I think it's the same thing as what you're trying to say, is that if you have had trauma, if you have the list of things, then having an abortion, your risks are far greater than someone without all those kind of things.
Absolutely.
And that reminds me a lot of, the ACEs study, which I've talked about a bunch, which is Adverse Childhood Experiences Scale. So yeah, if your ACE score is high and you have an abortion, it's going to increase, the consequences.
Absolutely. And she was one of those people. And I do share that story often. I actually will share it with my clients, not as a manipulation thing, but as a kind of relatability thing. Like, hey, I understand I have this loved one that's been through that.
It's actually humility too, because you're saying I didn't do it right.
Oh yes. I remember, I'll tell you the most devastating part of my memory that I remembered was, again, I was pregnant. So I was emotional myself, and here I am, I'm 8 months pregnant. I'm about to give birth. So I'm relating my situation with, what she had done. So I regret it, but I'm glad God used it. So she approached me afterwards and I can tell she wanted to talk, but part of me felt so much empathy for her and compassion, but the other part of me felt like I need to be strong and show her that I'm angry with what she did. So when she came to turn to talk with me, I completely changed the subject and turned around. And like my heart aches to this very day. I can see her face expression of just, remorse. And but that's the fuel that I use now to make that personal connection in the counseling room with the girls and just let them know, hey, listen, you matter just as much. So that's what the Lord used to teach me that, he gave me that dream, not just because of that baby, which of course he obviously cared for, but because he cared for this loved one just as much.
Man, that's such a hard story. And I think a lesson that a lot of us have to learn in the caring field as we screw up, as we make things about us, we call it countertransference in therapy. So somebody's sitting here and it happens to me quite often when it's a divorce situation and I'm working with a family and there's a kid and there's a divorce. I can feel my parents divorced when I was 8. And so, you don't stop living with those consequences.
Yeah.
And so I can feel myself just passionately wanting to
Yeah.
fix the problem, but it's not my story.
Right.
It's not my situation. It's not my parents. It
Right.
doesn't guarantee anything for this kid's life necessarily. But sometimes you can step in it,
Yeah.
and say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing because of that countertransference. And so
Absolutely.
I think one lesson people can learn is don't make things about you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is compassion means, moving yourself out of the center of the story and putting the other person in context and saying and Jesus did that a lot. He was never making it about him. I mean, ultimately it's about him, but in his way he loved the woman at the well and the way he served and the way he met with the Pharisees and the way he met with those that are hurting and sick and who were unclean to the world. He didn't say, "Oh, you should have listened to me," or "How dare you do this?" or "You've now wounded me because you're behaving this way."
Yeah, I always get asked a lot, how can you do that? How can you sit before someone knowing that they want to, and just for lack of a better, this is what they say. So It's not what I say. They'll say, how can you sit before someone who wants to kill their baby? And I say, do you know that story where Jesus sees the woman, the funeral procession, and he sees the woman weeping for her son who was dead? The Bible says he looked at her and he had compassion for her. He's never had children. He didn't know what it was like to be a mom. He didn't know what it was like to lose a child. And so yet he can still empathize with her because he knows what loss feels like. I don't know what it's like to have an abortion. I don't know what it's like to sit in a chair and wonder who's the father and am I going to be rejected? But I do know what it's like to feel alone. And I do know what it's like to feel afraid. And so if I can tap into that emotion, I can say, this is what this person is truly experiencing right now. And this is what I need to minister to.
Absolutely. And be a learner, right? I mean, I think one of the things you do well is, being in that position and learning from them and listening to them and letting them express their story and how they got there. And I mean, that's a lot of the point, right? It's not coming and saying, "Hey, here are the resources and the rules and the law and this is what you should do."
Right.
It's like, let's be in relationship. Let me get to know you and get to know your situation, and then we can have some context for what's better for you or what's best for you. But you get to make that decision.
Absolutely. And that's what we tell them when they first come in. We have this phrase we use, earn the right to be heard. So let them know that you love them. Let them know that you're here to listen. I'll even tell them, hey, my name's Chantal. I want you to know everything's confidential. I'm going to ask some questions. We don't have to answer anything you don't want to. I'm here for you. I'm here so that you can have someone to listen and that you can have an informed decision to make afterwards.
Yeah, it's super good. Okay, so tell me about the pro-love abundant life idea.
Aspect.
Yeah.
So then you have, I know it sounds like it's steps, but pro-life, saving the baby, pro-love, saving them both, pro-abundant life. So we are actually not our own entity. We are the umbrella of our organization's called CareNet. They were founded by Dr. Billy Graham.
Who's that? No, I'm just kidding.
I'm going to say, I don't know. So
like, who is this guy?
So they have, they have pregnancy centers that are, different denominations like Catholic pregnancy centers. But overall, I love them because they keep us accountable with our beliefs. And so they have this idea now they want us to continue to talk about called pro-abundant life. So it goes, for example, we don't receive government funding so that we can share the gospel freely. This is one of our choices that we've made. So we do share the gospel, or at least we offer it with each client. We always ask permission for everything. But just because she chooses life, if she walks out of our door and she's never heard the gospel and she didn't know about Jesus, how is that going to affect her patterns and her lifestyles if she doesn't know the Lord?
Mm-hmm.
And simultaneously, just because she chooses life, we don't just give her a thumbs up and say, good job, So we want to come alongside her and prove that we are pro-abundant life because we not only care for her life after pregnancy, but also the baby.
Yeah, which brings us to, it's like one of the big problems with this podcast or with these conversations is, and I know a lot of my friends that live in California and people who are more on the liberal side. I mean, I'm extremely moderate, but, is that people are pro-life or pro-birth and not pro-life, right? That they get on this political kick and they want babies born and abortion's terrible and it's murder and all those kind of things. And people can take their stance however they want to on that. But if you don't if you're not in relationship with people, if you're not discipling people, if you're not loving on them and giving them resources throughout their life, that's a major problem.
It is, absolutely.
And so I think y'all do. So speak to that. That's what you're saying, right? It's like we're not just this place that's like, don't kill your baby, right? To be harsh, but you're like, no, who are you? how'd you get here? And then how can we, whatever decision you make, walk alongside you as you move forward? Is that accurate?
Accurate. And so pro abundant life.
Obviously, you're on the side of them not having an abortion, but
Right. But if they do, let me go to that part. We have what we call an abortion recovery class. So we want them to receive healing. And a lot of times we'll minister to a girl. She feels the love of God. We're pretty proud of that 85% of our marketing is just by word of mouth from clients. So we have a great reputation in the community.
Absolutely.
So even if she does abort, we did our job well. We ministered to her. We loved her. We gave her truth. We were, objective. We were confidential. And then we still offer her this post-abortion healing group, healing class that she can go and be a part of. We've had people abort maybe even the fourth abortion, and they'll come back, and they know they can come back, and that speaks volumes to us. Oh my
gosh, that speaks huge volumes.
Yeah.
Because I promise you, from a therapeutic trauma standpoint, if they don't feel safe, if they're not feeling love, they're not coming back.
That's awesome.
So that's incredible that people have the abortion and still come back and receive the resources.
Oh yeah. We've got, and we also have like some of our strongest client advocates are post-abortive women who made the decision sometimes even decades ago, but they now want to speak to that on a relational level and say, hey, look, it wasn't as empowering for me, but that part, the pro-abundant life, is like coming alongside her and wanting her to know, hey, your life matters beyond any decision you've made. The Lord still has a plan for you. He still loves you, still has a purpose. But then when it comes to, like, say, after birth. So, there's so many things that can be said. Like I think about foster care, how many children can end up in the foster care system. I know the state of Arizona, a child in the foster care system is worse off than if he or she were in their own home. Mm-hmm. And so just because a woman comes in and she's, thinking to carry, what is her situation like? Is she on drugs? Is she homeless? Even in those situations, I'll share about adoption. I'll share about different resources to help her get help, because we want to care for them way beyond the decision to say, I want to carry. Right.
So you're not just manipulating them into keeping the baby themselves and saying, hey, this is the only way to do this. You're saying, if you're going to keep the baby, here are the resources.
Exactly. And so we never... So there's a lot of, statements made about pregnancy centers, and that's not to say that some don't exist that
Absolutely.
do use that. But we pride ourselves, the umbrella of our organization prides ourselves on just truth. I heard this quote the other day. I can't remember the author, but it said, truth is revolutionary in a culture of deceit. So we don't have to deceive anybody. We don't have to manipulate. We just share the truth, share the objective material that we have, and then just show them the truth. Show them, hey, we mean it when we say we'll come alongside you, for them to see, what's available to them. We definitely pride ourselves on that aspect of it. And we ask permission, like, I know you're saying you're considering abortion. Would you want abortion information? If they don't want it, we don't force anything. Mm-hmm. But education is like huge to us. We want to empower people. So in that regards, if she's considering, all her options, she's undecided, we'll share with her all that information. And of course, in the hopes that if she does choose life, she knows that there's so much more beyond in helping her. And then, of course, too, another part of the pro-abundant life is talking about healthy relationships. I don't think it takes into account, I'll hear people say, and this is kind of one pet peeves, they'll make comments about women like, oh, she should do this and she should do that. And never once do I ever hear anything said about the male partner. Yeah. A lot of times, we've seen women who are missionaries in residence who have unplanned pregnancies, pastors' daughters, anybody in all kinds of places, and pain is not to one specific group. It's to anyone, mm-hmm. Everybody makes mistakes, but loving them well requires, helping them to their specific journey. What resources are available to you that would help you to be successful way beyond after you have the baby?
Yeah, that's amazing. So you said your pet peeve. So what do you guys do for that side? That's why you offer the husband or the dad
mm-hmm. to come into the room. Yeah. So we, so my favorite conversations, we educate on what we call sexual risk avoidance. So a long time ago, it used to be called sexual abstinence. That's pretty much still what it is. We're encouraging them. Like I told my staff, I said, we're talking to people that don't know Jesus. And so the Holy Spirit's not doing that transformative work inside of them. So at the very least, helping them to be selective on who, not just their sexual partners are, but who their friend groups are. Right. Like the influence of the world is like gravity, but you can choose who will have influence in your life.
Yeah. And for me as a sex addiction therapist, like, it's not about, I don't have to bring religion into it. We have enough evidence and facts that having sex with a bunch of random people is not good for anybody.
Right, right.
So that's kind of the conversation, right? It's like, it's not just don't do it or you're impure, anything like that. It's more of the like, hey, here's your risk assessment.
Right.
And here's most likely what's going to happen if you keep doing this.
Yeah. And so just like conversations like,
because their parents didn't have that conversation.
No.
That's another problem is we assume that people who are coming into an abortion clinic, who have had sex, who have gotten pregnant, a lot of people are like, well, they shouldn't have done that, or they're bad people, or they're immoral, or they're poor, or they're whatever. And the reality is that I know this, is that none of us in this culture are doing a very good job on educating our children around sexuality.
That's right.
There's a huge culture of neglect and talking to them about all kinds of things, from masturbation to using the right terms to menstruation. And you can just magnify that depending on their socioeconomic status.
Absolutely.
So it's like if people who are middle to upper class aren't doing it, then the consequences, right, aren't that as extreme. And just like with everything else, the lower income you get, the more consequence that has for people.
Yeah.
Because the more opportunity they have, the more lack of supervision, the more they're trying to get affirmation and attention and affection from people. And so it's like, if you were them, if you had that same, culture, then you would be doing the same thing. And so we have to do this prevention work that no one wants to do.
Right.
Or that we're not doing, and the government's certainly not doing.
Right.
To get to these kids when they're 0 to 6 to 7 to 12, so they don't end up in your office at 14.
Right.
But we want to argue about like this, hey, what do we do when they're 14 and have an abortion? Well, we do need to have some things, and I'm glad you're there. But the problem is way before that.
It is. I had, my youngest client, we've had 9-year-old. That's our youngest so far. But my youngest client was 11. She just turned 11. My daughter at the time was 9. I saw her, it was like Christmas time. The mother was just beside herself, single mom. She had found sexting, messages on her phone and said, I don't know what to do. So I sat with the girl for a while. I youth pastored for 7 years. So I love teenagers. And so that age doesn't scare me. But I sat with her and I said, so tell me, when did this start? Because obviously we know it didn't just start with sexting. It started somewhere. And so she told me that her friend group, at the age 8, and it breaks my heart, they're just casually having sex with each other. So yeah, young kids are all, experimenting, and parents don't know, and they don't think to have, age appropriate conversations with them because they think, well, surely they don't know these things. You know what I mean?
Let me clarify. So when you said your youngest are 9 and 11, what do you mean by that?
So my daughter at the time.
No, not your daughter, but the people that you've seen that are clients.
Oh, so the youngest client that we've had that was pregnant was 9.
Oh, wow.
The youngest client that I've seen personally that I got to talk to was 11.
Okay. So you were saying that we're pregnant. I was just clarifying that for people because I think people forget that that's a reality.
Yeah. Well, now the 11-year-old, she came in not because she was pregnant. She came in just to specifically, mom said, I need someone to talk to her about sex.
Right.
And so we talked for a while, some of the things too, I think on this topic of just educating about sex. Some of the girls that come in, mainly from being raised in the church, being raised in very strict religious homes, even their concept of sex is like terrible.
Oh, absolutely.
So, but even encouraging them to understand, like they're the ones that don't know the least about their bodies. They know the least about their first menstrual period and just their cycles and things like that. So yeah, education goes full ways.
Oh, for sure. You wouldn't have, the amount of people who I talk to who are educated and successful that don't know about sexuality at all, is ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, all of it goes back to education and prevention. And we're I'm doing some talks at the Y right now, not to plug that, but the whole goal is how do we educate and prevent so that we have a generation moving forward in the church, at least, who are healthy, who have a good middle view that's not, completely, hey, you can't do anything, and once you get married, you can do everything, or, hey, you can do everything and it's all fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because those are the two large majority of the people that I interact with on a daily basis.
Absolutely. And then you have the aspect of the girls that are sexually active. What percentage of that are girls who were abuse victims, and that's all they've known?
Oh, man.
We see a lot of those. My most compelling client I've ever had, it was earlier on in my time being with them. She actually may have come from your services. So she said she heard about us from her trauma therapist, and I said, "Oh, okay. So do you mind me asking? What do you go to trauma therapy for?" And she said, when I was age 7 to age 12, I was violently raped by a family member. I guess it was in the state that she was in, because she was comparing it to Louisiana. She said had it happened in Louisiana, things would have been different. In her state, the law didn't require for the state to remove her from her home. So even though the perpetrator was removed, her grandmother coaxed her to tell the courts she dreamt it. So she did. And so this man's a free man. And so she suffers, trauma post that. And so she just looked at me and said, I could never be a good mom. And it hit me so strongly, is that how in the world can I, get her to be education, that her baby matters, that her unborn baby that she's never seen has intrinsic worth and value, if she was taught and shown her whole life that she has no value. And that is so key. And I think that when it comes to like the pro-baby or pro-life argument, they forget that that's a person. And truly the only person who can choose life for that baby is that mom. And if she knows that her life has value, that she was known to be, to be created before the foundations of the earth, she'll think differently about not just her life, but her baby's.
Absolutely. I think that's such a key point, is for people that are listening, to not forget about these mothers and about these fathers and about these family systems, that God tells us to worry about all of that.
Absolutely.
That we can't just get caught up in the moment and with our tunnel vision on the baby. Yes, we want to save babies, and we don't want babies to die. But if we're not encompassing the community, if we're not looking at the whole picture, if we're not looking at the body, then it's very problematic.
It is. Our CareNet president, he under the Pro-Abundant Life, he says, Bible says, good religion is looking after orphans and widows. Our modern day widows are single moms. Our modern day orphans are those children that are unwanted, and we need to do better as a community, especially a church community, as making sure that they're raised well. We're helping mom, we're helping baby. They're the most vulnerable for unplanned pregnancies. They're the most vulnerable for abuse. And so, yeah.
Man, that's tough. So talk to me a little bit about pro-life. So for people listening, maybe they don't know a whole lot. All they know is what CNN or Fox News tells them, and those can be very polarizing. So tell me kind of, when people hear pro-life, they think this, but what are kind of what's the spectrum that you see or that you've kind of experienced in doing this work?
Yeah, so when people think pro-life, they do think political. We always say we are the compassion side of pro-life. So unfortunately, there's radicalism can be found anywhere. We labeled it like for example, when we had the lockdown last year, a lot of our people that we knew were pro-life made statements that were very just detrimental to the body of Christ altogether, but especially when it comes to like life as a whole. And then we kind of started using the label like they're not pro-life, they're anti-abortion. Like there's a big difference. Being pro-life is you care about the individual. And
I find it interesting that a lot of my, what you don't want is to be pro-life. If you're pro-life, you're pro-life.
Right.
So, we're not going to get into a big death penalty debate, but like, it's interesting to me how many people are pro-death penalty and anti-abortion or anti-death penalty, but pro-abortion
right.
or pro-choice.
Right.
And so it's just crazy, the inconsistency.
Yes, your systemic worldview should be fluid.
Yeah, exactly. So keep going, sorry.
Yeah. And so there's that radicalism there. We also have, we know that some pro-choice sects are more what they would say pro-abortion, because, for example, we're not pro-choice, but you can kind of say, well, they are in the sense that they want people to know they have choices. Yeah. They have options. But there's a lot of that don't see that way. They want you to choose abortion. Abortion should be the choice that you choose. And that's not being pro-choice. That's being pro-abortion.
Right.
So there's those radicalisms, but...
And there's money that falls into that, right? There's a lot of systemic issues that come into why people are pro-abortion.
Yes. Yep. You have like the abortion giant, Planned Parenthood, which we don't have one here, but they profit. The majority of their profits are from selling abortions. And so I heard a director say the other day, they argue and say they care for women, but they sell them abortions, whereas we care for women and our services are completely free. Yeah. So like there's comparisons in that regard. There's also...
Why don't people believe that?
People believe that?
No, why don't people believe that? Like, because, with Planned Parenthood, you see these political things, and I try to read as much as I can about the different things, but why do people think Planned Parenthood's good?
Well, I'd say probably as a host of things. I can say maybe, the media. I can say there's some personal experiences with some radical pro-life groups where they were very just, cutthroat and not caring for them. I mean, there's so many things. Misinformation. Like there's this lie being spewed that Planned Parenthood does mammograms. I mean, it might have changed last year. I don't know, but I have yet to see them do mammograms.
Right.
But there's just a lot of misinformation out there.
Yeah, because you'll see that they Planned Parenthood puts out, they do mammograms, they do contraception, they do all these things, but you guys do that too, right?
Yeah, so we give them, so we don't do content, whatever, but we talk to them about sexual risk avoidance. But they do birth control. Now, I learned this just today, and so Guttmacher is a really good site. They're more pro-choice. So if you're looking for good information, that's a good place to find it. So there's only 18 states in the U.S. that require pre-counseling before an abortion. Mm-hmm. So giving, if a woman comes in and she says, "I'm undecided, I don't know what to do," are they going to counsel them? Are they going to give them information about their options? Or are they only going to sell them abortions? Well, if we know that legally only 18 states have to abide by that, then we know they're just selling abortions left and right. But also, when it comes to the financial part of it, I always tell my coworkers, I don't understand why there's not more funding to help children in the foster care system. There's not more funding to help single mothers. Why is the funding towards just specifically, Planned Parenting or Planned Parenthood?
No, it's a good point. I mean, last week the podcast was two of my friends who foster and adopt, mm-hmm. and yeah, I mean, again, it goes back to that preventative, like. They don't have any resources, and they're willing to lay down their life and serve and adopt and foster and take care of these kids. That's the other argument is like, pro-lifers, like there are a lot of pro-lifers who do a lot of amazing things, who do adopt and who do, mm-hmm. foster and who do give money and time and who do put in energy and effort on loving on people. And, mm-hmm. Again, like you said, there's the fringes, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, talking about why do people think Planned Parenthood does a good thing, it could be also their own personal experience with an unplanned pregnancy.
Absolutely.
A lot of the times that's probably the case. And just, again, an experience with somebody who was very radical in their pro-life beliefs and just didn't, represent Christ or the pro-life movement really well. I personally, I believe in having good conversations, civil dialogue with people who think differently and finding a middle ground. I know the Bible says Paul did that often. Mm-hmm. He tried to find that middle ground. For example, one of my core values is autonomy. So when a woman says, but it's my body, it's my choice, to a degree I can understand where she's coming from. I can understand the autonomy. I would take it, in conversation with her, I would take it to another level and say, let's consider the autonomy of also this child, mm-hmm. And so I think conversation is important to have, but there's a constant bickering or there's only one-sided media streams. It's kind of hard to have those necessary conversations. And people also think that pro-lifers will also think that making abortion illegal is going to stop it. It's not going to stop unplanned pregnancies. People have had unplanned pregnancies for decades, like going back to what we say, what we do, creating a culture where abortion's unthinkable is, changing the mindset of why, you matter and you deserve someone who's going to be committed to you, not a casual sexual relationship. You deserve someone who's going to love you for who you are and love you like 1 Corinthians 13 says, and having those deep conversations with girls, that's going to change the idea of abortion. You don't need birth control. Did you know that birth control is actually more detrimental to your physical health? And you can't use an abortion as birth control. Even pro-choice physicians will tell you that.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So there's a lot of women that, we have one girl that's had abortions, at least 12. And I can imagine like the stress that she feels, but. There will be medical professionals that will tell you. I know Dr. Levantino, he's an ex-abortionist. He had a change of mindset, change of heart years ago. He will make the statement, he's great when it comes to educating even late-term abortions, but he makes the statement that abortion is not an actual birth control method. There's high risks for damaging, perforation of the uterus, destruction of the cervix. There's so many risks physically for that to be considered an actual birth control. And then when you consider birth control, there's proof to show that it can cause strokes. There's a linkage to cancer. It changes the hormonal structure of women. There's proof to now show that it causes infertility in the early 30s. Mm-hmm. And so there's just these high risks that are, when it comes to like the sexual revolution culture, encouraging sexual independency for women, it's part of it's the birth control. People will say things like, well, the abortion numbers have dropped. They have, and part of that has to do with birth control. Actually, also Gen Z is having less sex than my generation, millennials, and I don't know if it has to do with, having it more available to you on the phone. I honestly don't know, but I think the overall, I think the education aspect of it is also readily available as well.
I would say this. I mean, this is not anything that I can prove, but other than my work in reading and just talking to people all over the world, I think the people nowadays, kids that are having sex, are having way more of it and way more violent and aggressive and different types of it. So there may be less that are having it, but they're not having the vanilla,
I seen that word, yeah.
The vanilla sex that we were having in the 80s and 90s. There's always been abuse. There's always been rape. There's always been these things, and that's true, and that's a major problem. There's always been a power difference between men and women. There's always been, those things, and so I think the Me Too movement coming around was a fantastic thing because it brought to light a lot of things that we all know and have experienced in life that you can get away with and that are problematic. But I think also what we've seen is this, like you were talking about, this empowerment movement out of that, right? Again, the fringes, not this huge group of people that have made, sexual revolution a big, okay thing. I mean, I've had therapists tell my clients who are like, hey, my husband's, struggling with sexuality or struggling with pornography or struggling with this. And they're like, well, that's just what men do. You need to get over that because it's a totally normal thing for men to do. And I say, well, it might be normal, but let's talk about healthy.
Right.
And I think that's got to be a change in our conversation. Yeah, it's normal for teenagers to have sex with their boyfriends and girlfriends. Is it healthy?
Right.
Not from like even a moralistic scriptural standpoint, which we can go there and there's plenty of good information. But if you're not a Christian, they don't care about the Bible. Right. They're not coming in saying, well, what does God say?
Exactly.
So we have to be able to give them good research and history and an understanding of, what their choices are so they can make informed decisions.
Right. One of the things that we think about when it comes to educating the woman about her healthy relationships. So we know that over 90% of women will choose life for their unborn if the partner is involved. Now, he doesn't have to be married to her. They don't have to be dating. They don't have to be living together. He just has to say, I want this to be my child. Basically take the fatherhood initiative, the responsibility of fatherhood. The feminist movement right now with sexual independency for women is, deteriorating that line that says the man is also a father. He's also a parent here. Obviously, legally, he has no right, which is also demasculating for a man to say that I don't, and so actually, one of the things that we do for our Bible studies, we do offer a Bible study for the man as well, for the abortion recovery healing, because awesome. He's also impacted by that as well. But yeah, so the sexual revolution's not really been that healthy. And my favorite conversations with girls are the ones that have negative tests. They have that sigh of relief. And I'll say things like, remember this feeling, because, if you didn't want to have a baby with this man, is he really worth your time? Or is he really worth, time and youth are the two non-renewable currencies. You don't get that back. Right. Do you want to waste your youth, fooling around with a relationship that's not going to last? We talk about just knowing what love is. So a lot of times, I'll ask them, I had this one girl tell me, I said, do you want to have sex with him every time he says, I want to have sex? She says, no, you know how men are, though. I said, is he patient with you if you say no? She says, no. I say, is he kind? And she says, no. So I say, can I show you something? So I'll pull a Bible from our thing, and I said, this is called the love chapter. This is how you know someone loves you. Are they patient? Are they kind? Do they put you first? I said, if this person, if you tell him, I don't want to have sex and he's not patient, or I don't want to do this and he's not kind, I said, he's not showing you that he loves you. Do you know why God put this in here? Because this is how God loves you, and this is how he expects someone to see you. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, like, they'll screenshot it. I had one girl say, well, I need to do that for myself too, because I'm not loving that person that way either.
Wow.
But it's, truth, again, this is revolutionary once it's brought to them. But having those conversations, like, would you let somebody come into your vehicle and trash it? You have standards for your vehicle. You should have standards for your emotions. You should have standards for your life. Intimacy is so much more than just physical. Intimacy is emotional, intellectual, all these other things. And, you should have standards for yourself to keep yourself the healthiest place possible.
It's so good. Yeah, I think it's interesting when you say that, because within the last couple of years, I work a lot with human trafficking and with purchase not for sale, and we do a lot for women out of trafficking. Mm-hmm. And as I've been kind of walking through that, I've realized, like, all the guys that I see, all the men that I work with, they're all also unhealthy sexually. They also mm-hmm. have no boundaries. They also don't understand, we've been told yes means, or no means yes, and that people are just playing hard to get. And you watch movies and films and books, and it generates this narrative. And so, a lot of guys just have misconceptions. They've never been taught by a male how to treat a woman, how to act. They think women like what they like. I always use, when right now the biggest thing is guys and girls sending their self-nude pictures back and forth. And I try to tell guys all the time, especially teenagers, I'm like, no girl wants a picture of your penis. That's not a thing. Maybe some, but for the large majority, 98%. But boys think and men think that women think like they do.
Right.
Right. So because of biology, because of testosterone, because of us being more visual creatures, we want, we would love for our wives to send us a picture in lingerie or send us a nude picture. And so we do those things thinking that's what they would like. And no one's ever taught them that, no, we're different, and they might not like that. And it's not the same kind of arousing thing. But we don't do this education with them. And then they get in a situation with a girl thinking, well, she wants to, but she doesn't want to. And the girl doesn't know how to say no and set boundaries. And it goes very badly.
It does.
But neither one of them know what's bad.
Right.
So they leave the situation just feeling shame and feeling confused. They go talk to people who give them terrible advice. And then they're in my office at 35 trying to be married and recover from 15 years of unhealth.
Yeah.
Because they never sat down and found out what was true.
Right.
And I say all the time, people, most of us don't know what love is.
Right. Right.
Not just poor, low income, or somebody who's been in an abusive situation. It's all of us.
Yeah.
There's a rabbi that I love, and he tells this story of fish love. And he says, I'm walking down the road and I see this man and he's got this fish. And I say, oh, you caught the fish? And he said, yeah, I love fish.
Yeah.
And he says, oh, you love the fish. So you saw the fish, you caught the fish, and now you're eating the fish. And he says, so much of life is fish love. It's seeing something and thinking, what can it do for me?
No, that's not true.
Right. But love is selfless. It's what can I do? How can I serve this person?
That's so true.
And so many times, these people who are having sex before marriage or having sex with multiple partners that get pregnant, it's because they're trying to get love. They're trying to get affirmation. They're trying to find connection. And 99% of the time, it's because they came out of a home that didn't give them that.
Absolutely.
No matter how much money they made, no matter what their ethnicity is or gender is, if they didn't get the truth, in my opinion, of the gospel, which is you're loved, you're valued, you're secure in who God says you are and in how we're treating you as parents, then you go looking for it in all these situations.
Yeah.
And so I think it's beautiful what you do because, man, y'all do such a good job of encompassing all of that. Right? It's not just let's not have an abortion. Right. It's like we're not even have to talk about that.
Right.
Let's love you and disciple you and be, in relationship with you and trust that the Holy Spirit is going to prompt what it's going to prompt.
Absolutely. A lot of my favorite conversations, I'm honestly, even though obviously the information is given, our main topic of conversation is what's going on in her life, what's going on in her relationship. A couple weeks ago, I had a girl, they called it something, the nurse explained it to me, postpartum psychosis. It's a lot, deeper than depression. Yeah. And she was explaining to me that was her issue, that she had that. She had cancer, a whole host of other things. And when I looked at her, I said, gosh, yeah, I can see why you're in your position considering an abortion. And then to make matters worse, her pregnancy ended up being multiples. And so she's just completely, dumbfounded. But ultimately, our conversation was just mainly about fear and just, how fear has just gripped her whole life. And the last statement I was able to say, and I knew it was a Holy Spirit moment, something else was brought up with the nurse. And I just immediately when I said it, the girl looked at me and I was like, oh gosh, this is a Holy Spirit moment, And I said, I get it. Fear is so big and it is so real right now in your life, but God is so much bigger. And she was a believer. And she said, I needed to come here just to hear that, And so, most of our conversations are just based on whatever it is she's going through, whatever God wants her to hear. We always pray before. We're very objective in the sense of our information, but we always pray beforehand, say, Lord, we're your ministers. We are your co-laborers. When we're going in there, we're going to do work, but you're going to work with us. So give us the information that we need to do the best job possible. Yeah. So
that's incredible. All right. So what are some things that people, we talked about myths. We pretty much covered a lot of what me and you kind of planned on, but what are some main myths, I guess, or things that you want to kind of dispel while you're here?
Let's see. Abortion empowers women. And so just even going back to post-abortion stress, again, there's it's a possible risk, a high possibility that, people will go through, but not everybody will. On average, I forget his name now, C. Everett Koop, he was a Surgeon General. He said that for 15 years of experience, he said there were studies done recently after an abortion, 3 months after an abortion, where women were still mainly in that state of, relief. But he says the studies were flawed because they didn't go way beyond to what his expertise did, and to show the post-abortion stress even years, decades even afterwards, of how they truly did suffer afterwards. And so the myth that it empowers women, sometimes the myth, or sometimes that statement, uses things to say that motherhood is a disease. I see ads sometimes, propaganda from Planned Parenthood, for example. They'll say, you can't do this. You need to take this off your shoulders. And it's treating it as if, a woman is incapable of being strong, of being this strong entity that God created her to be. And granted, we know that not every woman wants to be a mom, and not every woman will be a mom. But motherhood in and of itself is not a disease. It's not this, thing that just takes away the empowerment of a woman. In fact, it makes her feel much more confident. Sometimes some women love the idea of raising a child, raising the next generation, impacting somebody else.
I think what's interesting about that is, I remember last year, maybe it was 2019, but there was a movement that went around on Twitter, and it was like shout your abortion or something like that. And it was a bunch of women saying how having an abortion was incredible for their life and is the best thing they ever did. And the part about that that's sad to me is, now there are extremes on both sides, right? There are people who are shouting. I mean, for me, I don't like the idea of standing outside of the clinic with a sign yelling at people not to do something, right? I feel like being in relationship with those people is the only way that anybody trusts you enough to listen to you. Right. From a trauma-informed care situation, what y'all do is perfect, because you're validating even you saying that, like, I could see why you want to do this. Like, that's so beautiful. Because all the time, I had somebody call this week, somebody was suicidal, and they're like, how do I talk them off the ledge? And I said, the first thing you need to do is you need to make it make sense for them. Like, you need to hear their story enough so you can say, man, if I were you, I would want to kill myself too.
Yeah.
Because that's going to de-escalate them. They want to feel known. They want to feel seen. They want to feel understood. But our biggest fear is, if we empathize, that we're validating.
Yeah.
Right? That if we empathize, we're telling them, I agree with you and you should do it.
Yeah.
But what it actually does is it makes them open up their brain and be able to learn.
Yeah.
Right? It allows truth to come in. So if somebody's standing on a bridge, or somebody's got a gun, or somebody's going to swallow some pills, if we sit with them and say, hey, look, yeah, your dad's abused you. Yeah, your parents divorced. Yeah, you've got this issue. If I were you, I could see why you wanted to do it. Man, they just feel so known and validated. It's the same way here. I could see why. If I were you, I would totally want to have an abortion as well. I would be so scared and so broken. I would fear everything in the future. I would not be able to take another step by myself. But then you get to say you don't have to.
Yeah.
Then you get to say, well, let's look at the truth and then make a good decision. But here's all the information. So you can have all the truth and all the knowledge and make an informed decision. And it's so sad to me, because that's totally different than one person saying that abortion's fine because their experience was good with it. Like, that's insanity.
Yeah.
You should, you should never say to anyone, in my opinion, my experience now dictates everybody else's experience.
Right.
But it's funny that's kind of that's the opposite argument, is like, oh, well, I had a good experience with it, so I'm going to just shout it and I'm going to tweet it.
Right.
And it's like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
First of all, I'd have to sit you down on my couch, and what I can guarantee is the fact that you're tweeting this means you're not a very healthy person.
Right.
So, like, it's kind of this counterintuitive thing in general. It's like, healthy people don't get on Twitter and shout about abortions. Because they don't know if this person, an abortion actually might be good or bad for them. Let's say we agree that we don't know.
Right.
Well, when you get on Twitter and you post, I think you should do this, or I think you should never do this, you don't know what people's stories are.
That's right.
You don't know how you're influencing people.
That's right.
So if you're healthy, you don't want to speak like that in public.
Right.
Right. You don't want to take this massive stance and say, here's what you should do.
That's right.
You have to say, tell me your story.
Yeah.
Let me hear about you. Let me hear about what's going on in your life. Now let's decide together. Let's walk together through what you need to decide. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. It makes me think about one of the things that we do in our trainings with our client advocates coming on, because we don't let anybody loose in the counseling room. We want to make sure that they have all the skills necessary. But we tell them, spiritually speaking, we know how the enemy is. He puts a target on your back when you start to do things for the Lord. But you're going to find that you're going to be around people, that God is going to strategically place you around people who are post-abortive, and you're not going to know. And because you work for a pro-life ministry, even though they don't understand that we're, a lot different, they're going to immediately associate you as being a radicalist. And so you have to make sure that your words, words matter. And you have to make sure that your words, either you're helping de-escalate situations where people, I had a staff, she told me she was sitting in her church pew, and there was a woman that walked by, and she had a big belly, she was unmarried. And two ladies behind her said, oh gosh, can you see her? She had her unplanned, she had a pregnancy. Can't believe she's walking around. And this woman whooped around and said, and you're the reason why I had an abortion, because of comments like that.
Ooh.
And so just like, we have to be in the situations now where we're helping people think differently. And, some people mean well, they're very passionate about the vulnerable. I was there once,
Yeah,
and
we learn and grow, right?
Yeah. And you're saying statements, and I mean, it's not wrong, but the context matters so much, and you don't know if that person is still in their moment of vulnerability, hurting and not freed yet. And so, you have to season your conversations with grace. I'm careful with my social media. I don't just post abortion things. You hardly ever do you see me. If I do, it has something else with it, you know?
For sure.
Just because I don't know, I have all these friends who are.
No, I know. When we met, and then I like kind of went through your social media. I always do that with people who I'm going to have on, just to make sure I'm not missing anything.
Yeah.
Because you do a great job of doing a really good job balancing, and you can see your heart, and you can see the gospel through what you do. And so I was just really encouraged with that, because I do have people who listen to this that are non-Christian. We do have people out there who are hurting, who are post-abortion, who I want this podcast to be enriching and loving and graceful for them, and not shaming. And I want the information that people hear to go, okay, I'm passionate about this, but maybe I should do that differently.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe I should pump the brakes on this, and maybe I should go have a relationship. Maybe I should call the Care Pregnancy Center and say, hey, how can I serve you?
Yeah.
How can I come alongside you? So that's another thing I wanted to say was, how can the average person help in their area, but specifically hear you guys, or if there's not something like this in their area, I guess they could start one.
Yeah. So I tell you honestly, two of the biggest reasons why a woman will have an abortion is fear of the unknown and fear of being alone. And a lot of times she is alone. She's abandoned by the male partner. She's abandoned by family, friends. Sometimes she's abandoned by her church. And that's the saddest to me, because that's the most important time that you should be the church. But if you have a pregnancy center by you, something that we are always linking with all the time is a ministry called Embrace Grace. So they are a pro-life ministry that comes through the church, because they want the church to be seen as the hands and feet of Christ. It's an emotional support group. So they host it in their church building with women just like them that are facing unplanned pregnancies, whether they want to choose adoption or want to choose to parent. It's 8 weeks, and then afterwards the church throws them a massive baby shower, so they're able to get all the items they need.
Wow.
It further shows that compassion and that love. I believe in individualism. I believe we're all missionaries in every facet of our lives the Lord uses. And we screw up sometimes, I know. But at the same time, we can also have opportunities to make things better. And so whereas that loved one of mine, I said it the wrong way all those years ago, I now am so intentional to say things correctly and to even go above and beyond what my coworkers will say is extra. I'm extra in my compassion sometimes, to the point of too bubbly. But so that people know that, love is here, compassion is here, empathy is here. You don't necessarily have to agree with someone's lifestyles to love them as an image bearer, and so even having those conversations with individuals. I had one with a lady the other day. We were at a life rally, and I go to these rallies especially to share about the pregnancy center. And we're talking about a specific lady who is very hateful towards our ministry. She has been for a long time, but it's because she personally has some terrible experiences, sexual abuse in her history by a religious fanatic. And so now she couples her abortions and her abuse with religion. And so she doesn't even honestly see the abortion side of what we do. She sees the religious side of what we do. And I was just explaining to this lady, because she said, how can people have abortions? How can people do that? I said, sometimes people are just stuck and they're hurting, and we need to minister to that pain first before we even have those right, wrong conversations. And, she kind of looked at me and said, everybody has an excuse of why to kill babies. And I said, well, that conversation is not going anywhere positive today, but I said to her, and those conversations are so detrimental. If somebody were to hear you say that.
Oh my gosh, awful. This is the two things I always try to teach my clients and people not to say ever if you're a Christian, really if you're a person, but as a Christian especially. One is, I would never do that. And then two, how could someone do that?
That's really good.
Because if you're in Christ, if you have received the grace of God, if you've forgiven for all your sin and brokenness, if you've sat in that, if you've looked in the mirror, then you're capable. If you had the same background, if you had the same story, if you had the same situation, you would have made the same choice.
Absolutely.
So to look at somebody and say, how could someone have an abortion? Like, I get it. I mean, it breaks my heart, right? And I know it breaks your heart to think of what people can do to themselves, mainly because I know how painful it's going to be. And I know the hope that is out there. But I also completely understand why somebody who doesn't have support, who has his terrible, horrible trauma, has been raped, has been abused, has been abandoned, would choose an abortion.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't ultimately say that might be the best thing for them, but I'm not them.
That's right.
And so all we can do is give them the most information, the most love. And then, again, what I love about you guys is no matter what they decide, you're still there.
That's right. One of the other myths is women who choose abortion are monsters. We always say, no girl grows up, says, I can't wait to have an abortion one day. By a host of events that happen in her life, she becomes sometimes a victim to her circumstances. And again, like my little pet peeve, why are we targeting her as being the person, because she's showing her sin, she's showing her, her pregnancy. Why are we targeting her? Why aren't we going through the full circle? Where's the family? Why aren't they supportive? Where's the husband? All these things.
That'll preach right there.
Yeah. And ultimately, understanding that,
where are we taking our own responsibility and how we've enabled this culture?
That's right. And it's so easy to cast stones, because we don't see everybody's sins, but we can see others and we think, well, we're more righteous if we do that. I think religion, an area that is very religious, my husband and I, we say that all the time. We despise religion. We want authenticity. I want an authentic relationship with God, the real God or nothing at all.
Right.
But an area that fuels the religion and the traditions or just the model of everything has to look a certain way and be perfect. Sometimes those are the most fueled areas for abortions because they can't break away from, I can't come into church looking like this, or I can't have them know that I've had sex outside of marriage. Sometimes a lot of the times the girls that we see come from those backgrounds, and it's not helping them to have this model of perfection that they can't reach, but rather coming alongside them and saying, hey, I'm so sorry. I can't even imagine, gosh, what if she got into a toxic relationship because her father was sexually abusing her? But nobody asked questions to say,
Absolutely.
what brought you to this guy? They immediately say, you're terrible at picking men, but they don't realize that sometimes that's all she's ever known her whole life, and she has nothing different.
Man, that's so good. Yeah, I mean, I see it all the time.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah,
walking through this with people and getting to see their lives. I don't think there's been a situation in my career where I've heard a behavior or a sin or a consequence or whatever, however you want to term it, and then heard their story and been like, oh my gosh, that doesn't make any sense. I'm always like, oh, that makes perfect sense.
It does.
But that's what being pro-life or pro-love or pro-abundant love and being in relationship with people, right? Same thing with foster care, same thing with adoption. You can't just be super pro something on a bumper sticker. Go to the walk, that's great. Donate your money, that's great.
Oh, yes, that's another pet peeve of mine. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You go ahead. Yes,
I tell them, all that. Working in this industry, I love what we do, and because we don't get paid a lot, obviously we're a nonprofit, but it's so rewarding to see people to see the freedom in their eyes, to see the love in their family grow, all the things. But it frustrates me because so many will say, I'm pro-life, or, I care about this, and their bumper sticker only pro-life, or their Facebook post only pro-life. Even churches, we're here for you, but they don't come alongside what we do. We are actively saving human lives. If you care about that, we are actively helping women come from brokenness of abortion, to freedom. Anyway, that's not a pet peeve of mine.
No, it's good. I mean, that same thing, my friend Shannon last week, we were talking about it, and she was like, yeah, they were talking about churches in Louisiana, and they were saying there's more churches in Louisiana than there are kids that need to be adopted. Like, that's insane.
It is.
But it just speaks to the problem we have with American church and American Christianity, and that is the problem.
It is.
I mean, I get why pro-choice movement despises us. We've given them enough ammunition to say, hey, let's come up with some other avenues of why this should work, and they're not wrong. They're a little right.
Yeah.
And the right is a little right, but there's a lot of wrong in both of those stances. Right. And if it's, in my opinion, not about Christ, not about service, not about the person, not about loving and dying to the person that you're sitting in front of, then you're going to be all wrong.
That's right.
You know,
That's
and
right.
so I think y'all do such a great job of balancing that, and just the fact that you allow, you know, the person to make the choice and then come alongside them afterwards. I mean, it's just such a beautiful thing because it's so impactful, because people are going to make those choices.
They
And we
are.
can be idealists all we want to and pretend like we can prevent that from happening, but you're not going to.
No, we have clients all the time, and we always tell our client advocates that are new, you don't save that baby. That client chooses life for that baby, and you have the opportunity to plant seeds for the Lord, and you don't save that client.
That's
Just
so
because you
good.
share the gospel doesn't mean you're going to save them. It's not a
Heck no.
Harry Potter, sinner's prayer.
Yeah.
You need to plant seeds, and God is faithful to water those seeds, and we think so highly of ourselves sometimes we're not going to make it in this ministry, because if we think we're the one that has to save this baby, then we're going to fall short, because it's not going to happen.
And you're going to be exhausted.
Absolutely. I have clients, choose abortion almost all the time. But, at the same time, I have clients that I've loved them well. I did my part well.
Yeah, and that's an eternal perspective. Mm-hmm. It's looking at it as like, okay, I'm not here just to do this one thing. I'm here to be in a relationship and trust that God's going to do the rest of it.
That's right.
That's so good. All right, let's see. Anything left? We did that. Yeah. So anything that you'd like to close with that you'd want people to know that we've missed?
I guess. Well, I don't know if you touched on it last week or not, but adoption is one of the positive options. So we. I see a lot of girls that come in and like, oh no, I could never choose adoption. Recently, a client told me she had negative views about adoption. That's one of the options we share about. Later in the counseling room, I talked to her some more. It turns out that her youngest siblings were adopted, and they just found out really recently. They're adults, and they're suffering with it. And so she says, I could never do that to them. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, there's a team of us. Some of us were adopted. Some of us have adopted, so we are able to speak into that. But I think the misconception about adoption is that there's only one way to do it. So we love educating them on saying, hey, there is such a thing as open adoption. You can choose your family. In the state of Louisiana, the birth mom does not pay. You can be as involved as you want to be in your child's life. They can know exactly who you are. A lot of times, they take vacations together, they grow up together. And then it's the most flexible because you can opt out of it at any time. Even in the hospital, you can opt out of adoption, or you can choose it if you want it to be, and so I think the education part of it is so key. Another thing that we do as far as parenting goes, our parenting center, we do co-parenting classes. Just because a woman is pregnant doesn't mean that that's her husband. You know what I mean? Like, just because she's pregnant by this man doesn't mean they have to get married right away. And a lot of times they shouldn't be married to that person. Yeah. So just even talking about,
that's amazing to hear, because I would think that the more liberal thought or pro-choice would think that a Christian would never say that, right?
Oh no.
You're forcing him to have the baby. You want him to get married. They have to, there's just all these myths around it that aren't true.
Yeah, no,
they are true in some areas, but not for everybody.
No, not at all. Because God cares about the whole of that individual, and especially if he's an abusive person, they're unequally yoked in the sense that they don't have the same core values. It's not going to work. But at the very least, we help them to co-parent peacefully. And so we do that through our parenting classes. We also encourage counseling outside, So we know that we're not the end all for everything. So we're huge on resources, local resources, especially for them. So when it comes to like adoption agencies, we are fangirls of your organization because we are all the time sending people to you. We have Brave Love is a huge adoption educational resources that just is online. abortionchangesyou.com. That is like a little card that sometimes I'm having a girl. Let's say her boyfriend in the waiting room, let's say he wants the baby, but she's kind of wants to know her options. So I have this little card that I can give to her. She can put in her wallet because knowledge is power. She needs to know about her options. And so the card leads her to a website to where it's all abortion testimonials, not just of women who chose an abortion, but the husband or the boyfriend, parents even. And I tell her, look, if I go to a new hair salon, I will look at reviews on Google because I'm not going to have them chop off 7 inches.
That's
I
right.
love my hair, but your body is so much more important than my hair, and your emotional well-being is so much more important than my hair. And so you need to know what have people said who've been there before. And so that's what that is. It's just honest testimonials. It's completely unbiased. There's no religious affiliation with it or anything like that. We give them information for shelters locally. We have a maternity home where we send our girls to. Heart of Hope is another sister ministry of ours. They actually came out of our pregnancy center years ago. They just celebrated 10 years.
Wow.
So they have girls from ages 12 to 22, and now even they can have them till after they've had the baby. Let's see what else, the resources. Embrace Grace. There's a lot of local churches here that host Embrace Grace groups. We have our post-abortion resources with us. We even have one that's non-faith-based. It's faith-based in the sense that the stories, it's called The Power of Your Story. The stories are all stories of women who had gone through abortions and had found healing through their faith. But if someone is, let's say, not a believer and they don't want to be the pressure of doing an extreme Bible study, which we do offer those too, we have that available to them. But supportafterabortion.com is a huge resource worldwide now that has a whole bunch of groups, even local, even Zoom, that are available to women too.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for coming on here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I hope this is super helpful for people to know, how they can get plugged in. As a Christian, if you're listening to this and you're passionate about widows and orphans and those that are, at the most risk, then here's a great place in Shreveport and Bossier to get plugged into. And so please do that. Please pray about the opportunity to go to the Care Pregnancy Center and support them financially, emotionally, in prayer. The one thing we can all do is pray for these men and women who are struggling, who are lost, who are broken, who are hurting, who are stuck in a situation feeling hopeless and hopeless. And man, we can just pray to the God we know that loves them and wants to adopt them, and that has adopted us. And so that's one. And then if you're listening and you're not a Christian, or you're on the fence, or you're like, I don't really know if I believe in all this stuff, and I'm super pro-choice and all those kind of things, just know that there are Christians, there are people in the world who are also pro-choice. That it doesn't have to be I want an abortion or I don't want an abortion. It's that people want women to have all the information and to be able to ask hard questions and to have hard conversations so that they can make the most informed decision that they can make. And I think y'all do that really, really well. I'm so proud of y'all. Glad to refer back and forth. And, after we met a couple weeks ago, I was just like, man, this would be a great person to talk to, and I love your passion. And then seeing you do the walk and do the fundraisers, that's another thing. I was like, man, Give for Good's coming up, so I was hoping this would be an avenue to just maybe the people that listen could flood you guys with some support and some love. And
so shameless plug. Give for Good is coming up I think it's May 4th or May 6th. It's the Tuesday, first Tuesday in May. So giveforgoodnla.org. You can find Care Pregnancy Center, and it helps us. We're raising money for our curriculum this time around for our parenting center.
Absolutely. So put your money where your mouth is. Anyway, thank you so much. And that's the close of episode 26. So please subscribe on our YouTube channel. Leave us a review if this is helpful for you on our iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. God bless you guys and have a good week.